Hey everyone, welcome back to Shop Life. This has been one of my most requested videos regarding the whole e60, e90, that era of BMWs. So we're going to be going over the N54 engine and doing the most common issues with that specific engine. So I've got videos that correlate with the whole e90 chassis as well as the e60 to show you guys what the most common issues are with that entire car. But they had different motors in there as well. So we're just going to be focusing on the N54 only. So the variation after the N54 is the N55, which some of these issues will apply to that as well, but we're going to be mainly discussing the N54 here. The N55, the general consensus on that is it is a little bit more reliable than the N54, but the N54 is a little bit better on tuning as far as, you know, using a JB4 or any kind of MHD tune, anything like that. So by N54, we're talking about the 3-liter twin turbo engine in all of the BMW E90s, E60s, even some of the X5s, and we're just going to be going over most of those common issues. There is a little bit of variation between that and the N52 as far as the whole turbocharging system and everything else correlated with that as well. Alright, so let's go ahead and start with the whole issues. We're going to go over 15 of the most common ones. We're going to start with the high pressure fuel pump. So the main reason I want to start with that is because it is a very common issue and it does go out without any warning. But usually you do get some kind of check engine light, and usually your car will be in limp mode, so you won't really have to worry about, you know, being stranded in the middle of nowhere. It is possible, but usually very unlikely, and you'll most likely get a fault code and a limp mode associated with that first. The high pressure fuel pump actually does have an extended warranty on it from BMW, so the warranty extends it's up to 10 years or 120,000 miles, whichever comes first. So 10 years starts from the production date of the car. So even if your model is 2010, let's say, your production date can be 06 of 2009. So, you know, you will still have warranty until the 6th month of 2019, because that's 10 years. Or if you pass 120,000 miles, then your warranty is done. So it's either or. Make sure you know you don't get confused when you're looking up the whole warranty stuff. In some cases, if you're like just past the warranty, sometimes BMW will honor it. So it's good to always contact your local dealer and go from there. But like I said, the high pressure fuel pump is actually underneath the intake manifold. The low pressure fuel pump is the one that's underneath the back seat. So the high pressure fuel pump, pretty much what it does is, since this is a direct injection engine, it pressurizes that fuel a lot more. It's pretty much exactly what it sounds like. It's a high pressure fuel pump. So there's a couple of sensors that are related to that high pressure fuel pump as well. It's the low pressure fuel sensor, which detects the fuel pressure coming from the low pressure pump from underneath the seat, as well as the high pressure fuel sensor. And that's going right after the actual high pressure fuel pump itself. So sometimes those sensors can be triggered and, you know, it'll make you think that the high pressure fuel pump went out when in reality it's the sensors. And that's where some kind of BMW app comes into play. I know one of the most favorite ones as far as the E90, E60 goes is the Carly app. The Carly one, I believe, is the just, you know, Bluetooth that lets you do coding as well. You can get the Wi-Fi one as well. So just look into that. I hope to make a review video on the Carly whenever I get a chance. So stay tuned for that as well. Now, going along the lines of fuel, another common issue are those high pressure fuel injectors. So those injectors are around $160, $180 a piece, and they also do have warranty. The same warranty as that high pressure fuel pump is 10 years or 120,000 miles, whichever comes first. And usually when you have any of those injector issues, you want to go ahead and get all 6 replaced, especially if you're under warranty. Even if you're not, I would still highly recommend replacing those fuel injectors. One of the ways to prevent that from happening is to actually make sure that your whole intake system is clean for the most part. Try to run a good quality fuel. I'm not really, you know, some of the myths and stuff regarding the fuel, I haven't really personally tested it like that, but I would just, you know, try to stick with one brand, try to use some kind of fuel injector cleaner if you want, and that's just to make sure that you're getting, you know, good fuel going through those injectors and don't have to worry about clogging them up at all. A lot of people will be experiencing issues as far as misfires, even some misfires like when you first started up, a rough idle, also when you're, you know, under boost, like, you know, you're actually stepping on it, you might get some misfires when you're really, like, you know, wide open throttle. And those can also be related to those high pressure fuel pump, the injectors. But there's also the option of the ignition coils. The ignition coils are what sit right on top of that valve cover. They attach to the spark plug into the hole. So they're just as normal ignition coil. There's 6 of them since it is a 6-cylinder engine. And you can replace those. They're not that expensive. I think they're about $30 a piece, made by Bosch. But if you're going to replace one, I highly suggest replacing all 6. And if you're at it, might as well change the spark plugs out as well, since you're taking off the coils to get to the plugs anyways. So I would definitely recommend doing those ignition coil spark plugs around every 60 to 80,000 miles, and that's because it is a direct injection engine, so there are chances of more carbon buildup throughout the whole engine. And that is pretty much a segue to our next common issue, which is carbon buildup. So with a direct injection engine, you don't have any fuel getting sprayed into the intake side of the motor. So what's going on is on a normal fuel injected engine, what you'll have is the gas or fuel will actually spray over onto the intake port, and that's where it atomizes with the air. So you get you get that fuel spray all over those intake valves, all over that intake port, and it just keeps them clean. So even if you're burning a little bit of oil through the intake, usually that fuel spray will keep those intake valves clean. On direct injection engines, however, you don't have that fuel spray on that intake side. And with a turbocharged motor as well, you're going to get a little bit extra carbon buildup. So what the most common issues with that is sometimes you'll have hard starts. Sometimes you will even see whenever you're trying to get on it a little bit, it might be struggling, it might feel a little bit sluggish. And that carbon buildup, what it does, it just it's all that oil blow by going through the intake, and it just mixes with carbon, and it just gets all hard and gummy. You can look up pictures for those intake valves. They get really bad, and they should be cleaned out, I would say, almost every 40 to 50,000 miles, sometimes even sooner. The way to help that issue is to install an oil catch can. So what the oil catch can does, it takes all the oil vapors right from that breather into a separate can instead of running it back through the intake. And that'll just help out with that entire carbon buildup. But before you install an oil catch can, and to even just clean up all that carbon buildup, you have to get what's called a walnut blast. So a walnut blast, pretty much you pull off the whole intake manifold, you close each cylinder's intake valves, and you actually shoot walnut shells onto those intake valves and that entire port. So those walnut shells are very fine, they're not going to damage any of the metal, and it just allows you to clean all that up. So you do have to use some sort of a blaster device, and I mean there's a lot of shops that will perform that for you. There's a lot of even dealerships that offer that service. So definitely look into that. And while you're at it, I mean, make sure you replace all those vacuum lines, because that's also a very common issue. So there's a couple of vacuum lines on the intake side of the engine, and there's also vacuum lines on the exhaust side that go to the wastegates and whatnot. This is the charge pipe that goes to the throttle body. Vacuum lines. Right there. Vacuum lines. More vacuum lines. This is going to be different on the 3 Series. More vacuum lines. Valve cover. So those vacuum lines from factory, there are some kind of a heat shielding on them, but they do not last. By now, especially, most of those vacuum lines will be needing replacement. If you want to do something that's a little bit, an upgrade per se, I would definitely suggest using some silicone vacuum hoses. They'll last a lot longer in the heat. So definitely look into those silicone vacuum lines and just get maybe even a 12-foot, 20-foot roll and just change all those vacuum lines out. So along with those vacuum lines though, another common issue is the actual charge pipe itself. So the charge pipe is what comes out from that intercooler and goes straight to the throttle body. And there's also some of those boost solenoids and some of those vacuum lines attaching around that area as well. What usually happens is they start to crack. It might not happen, if you're running a completely stock boost, you don't have any kind of tune on it, but there's still chances that when you're pulling off that charge pipe, sometimes they do crack. There's a metal clip on it, and you do have to wiggle it to pull it out. So definitely inspect that if you're getting any other vacuum leaks or boost leaks. Now the big area of concern, the turbos themselves. So the N54s, a lot of people tune them. There's so many options out there, like I said earlier, like the JB4, the MHD. And when you start running increased boost pressure, you're going to get a lot more issues. But most of those issues are usually with those turbos. So the turbos, there's 2 main issues that usually occur, and they usually happen around 80,000 up to 120, 130 around that time. If you have any kind of aftermarket tune, you're going to just accelerate those issues. So the main things I'm talking about are the wastegates rattling. So that's something that you'll hear, especially when you first turn the car on. You can hear those actuator arms, they just have a little bit more play in them, and that just happens over time. So you hear a little rattle noise coming from the exhaust, and usually it goes away when you rev it, and that's probably just because you can't hear them as much. But you will hear that small rattling noise. A lot of people will get scared of it, but it's just the wastegates rattling. Obviously, wastegates can fail, and usually when those wastegates fail, you do have to replace the entire turbo. So there are other aftermarket turbo distributors. They have upgraded ones as well. So you can always look into that, even if you wanted to be preventative. Now, the other common issue with the turbos are the turbo seals. And once again, this is more of an issue when you have a tune on it. And those turbo seals, what usually happens is once they blow out or once they start leaking, they will have a lot more smoke coming out of the tailpipe. So you'll have like white smoke. It'll be like coolant burning or mixing with the oil and just burning off. And that's usually not a good sign. And that usually happens when when you're driving and you let off the throttle after you have somewhat of a hard run. So once you let out that throttle, you'll start seeing some smoke coming out the back. Now, if you're on the throttle and you're also seeing smoke, chances are it could still be turbo seals, but I would also look into the the high pressure fuel pump or the injectors as well. And now the turbos, they also have somewhat of an extended warranty. The turbos are warranted up to 10 years or 80,000 miles, whichever comes first. Usually whenever you go into the dealership with the whole wastegate rattling noise, what they'll do is they'll put some kind of a software update on it. And what that software update does, it just adjusts that arm, the actuator for the wastegate, to just adjust how far it moves. And usually that's just a temporary fix. And I would definitely just, if you're getting that rattle, I would either leave it alone, don't worry about the update, or just upgrade the turbos, or just replace them with, rebuilt ones. Now, with the turbos out of the way, another weak area of the N54, well, almost a lot of the BMWs, matter of fact, is the cooling systems. So on the N54 and the e60, e90, the whole era, regardless of the engine, you have an electric water pump. So electric water pump can pretty much go out without any warning like any other electronic part. Pump is kind of hard to get to just because of the location of the entire thing. They usually fail around 70 to 80,000 miles, and when you take those off, you have access to the thermostat as well, and a lot of those hoses, which I would recommend replacing as well. But as always with the cooling system, you really do want to stay on top of it and be preventative with that, because that can leave you stranded. As opposed to the E46 though, they do have somewhat of a safety built into them where the car will either go into limp mode or it might even just shut off completely once it starts getting a little too hot. And a very common symptom before the water pump usually tells you that it has failed is you're going to start hearing the fan like constantly on, all the way like 100%. Even when you turn the car off, it'll still be on. And usually that signifies that your water pump has went bad. And there's also a lot of fault codes that you'll get, which is an advantage with the electric water pump, is it does have a sensor on it. So if there's something going on with it, you'll get a fault code for it. So like I said, it's always important to have some kind of BMW scanner, especially with these newer cars. There's just so many more electronic components, and it does help out a lot with diagnosing your issues. Now, onto the thing that almost every BMW has, and it almost seems like they come with it from the factory: oil leaks. So with the oil leaks, they're practically the same for almost every engine for that matter. You have the valve cover gasket, which is prone to leaking. It is a plastic valve cover gasket, and they usually leak around, I would say, about 60 to 70,000 miles. You'll start smelling some oil burning when you're driving once the exhaust starts heating up. So the valve cover gasket, that you can change out when you're doing the ignition coils, plugs, all that. I actually have a video on that. I'll link that down below. Now next we have the oil filter housing gasket. And this is probably one of the worst ones that I see the most often, and it actually causes so many more issues than people give it credit. So the oil filter housing gasket, once it starts leaking, it actually gets all over your belts, gets all over the pulleys, and it just keeps running down, and the belts just fling it everywhere, and it gets over pretty much everything, all the cooling system hoses and everything. And it can also cause your belt to break or snap or just slide off. And that's also very common, and sometimes when that happens, it actually takes out a lot more stuff with it, and it might even get sucked up into the engine through the front crank hub. So you want to be very, very cautious when it comes to that oil filter housing gasket and stay on top of it. You'll start seeing buildup around it. You'll start seeing like the belt get a little greasy and a lot of buildup around that area as well. Along with the oil filter housing gasket, on the newer models, I believe it's 08 and newer, you also have the oil cooler, which attaches right to that oil filter housing. The oil cooler has a separate gasket, and it's got two hoses that go to it from the bottom, which also have O-rings. So you want to take care of that while you're doing the oil filter housing. You can actually do the oil cooler gasket even without really taking off too many things. Now, arguably the most expensive oil leak repair on any car, which is the oil pan gasket. They almost always start leaking around 80,000 to 100,000 miles, but sometimes, age can also increase or accelerate that wear. The oil pan gasket is mostly expensive just because of the location and what all it requires to actually be replaced. It sits above the front subframe, so in order to replace it, you do have to drop all that front suspension, you have to release the engine mounts, support the engine from the top, and then you can pull off that oil pan. I would definitely check all of the torque values on those bolts if you're starting to get a little bit of seepage, and try to do that before it starts running out all the way from the engine. And any of these issues, it's very easy to diagnose when you have a clean engine bay. And a lot of people don't understand that. It is very important to keep your engine bay clean, especially even if you do already have a leak. If you let that leak get everywhere, it just accumulates a lot of dirt, can cause a lot more issues in the long run, and it's hard to diagnose when something is leaking. So if you have a messy engine bay, it's just gonna cause a lot more issues in the future. Try to keep it clean. I would say keep it as like a routine wipe down at least when you're washing the entire car. Just wipe down the engine bay. You could buy like a normal steam cleaner. Do whatever you need to do. Try to keep it clean. So these automatic transmissions that are on this era of cars are all using mostly those ZF 6-speed. It's a ZF 6 HP. You can have the 19, 26, 21. There's a bunch of variations there. But almost all of them have issues with the mechatronic sleeves, the solenoids that are actually inside the transmission as well, where it seals that valve body. So the mechatronics unit is the valve body for the most part, and the whole electronic system is built into that. So I have a separate video that just goes over all those ZF issues and troubleshooting them. I'll have that link down below, but that obviously only applies to those automatics. If you have a manual, you're good to go. Usually you don't have to worry about that. And some of the other ones actually had options for the DCT as well. That's probably the later model, like the 335 IS. And with the DCT, it has its own issues as well. Now another issue that is very present in these motors is the Vanos solenoids. So the Vanos solenoids, there's two of them. They sometimes get clogged, especially when you're not running a good oil change interval, or if you're letting the oil get really dirty. And when they get clogged, you'll start getting misfires, you'll get timing related codes. And they're actually not that difficult to clean, and they're not too expensive. So I would definitely suggest cleaning them out, changing the O-ring that's on them. Just doing that regularly, I would say around every 60 to 70,000 miles, or whenever you start getting codes as well. Along with those Vanos solenoids, you also have the camshaft position sensors, which are right next to each one of those solenoids, and you can also replace those whenever they go bad. Sometimes there's a lot of dirt that gets in that area from other oil leaks, so make sure you just try to clean those connectors, keep everything clean for the most part. And now, this is a very debatable topic as far as oil changes go. I highly recommend running an interval depending on how you drive and where you drive. So if you're doing mostly city stop and go in traffic, I would definitely suggest getting your oil change every 6 to 8 months or around every 5 to 6,500 miles. I would stay in that range just because of all that carbon buildup that these are known for. You don't want to have that issue, especially with dirty oil, and the oil turns black almost instantly on these engines, the direct injection ones at least, because of that carbon buildup. So still, I would definitely suggest doing 5 to 6,500 mile oil change intervals if you're doing a lot of stop and go. If you're mostly on the freeway, you can go up to, let's say, about 7,500, but same time interval, 6 to 8 months. So that's pretty much what I recommend as far as oil changes go. I would definitely get a good quality filter. The OEM supplier is Man Hummel, so you can get those. They're not too expensive. And as far as oil goes, you can run 530, 040, 540, whatever you prefer. You can get it from the dealer. You can run Mobil 1, you can run Liqui Moly, just a fully synthetic. If you're running oil change intervals at my suggested time, I would definitely, not really even sweat it about what type of oil you're using, as long as it's a fully synthetic. Try to make sure it's approved. I know the Mobil 1 040 isn't, but it's the Euro formula. The formula itself hasn't changed, and I believe just the approval or the certification changed. But it's still a good quality oil. Everybody still uses it, and nobody really has any issues with it. So most of these oils you can find at Walmart, Mobil 1, Castrol, all that's at Walmart, or you can just go to the dealership if you're close. But anyways, that's it for this video. I know I didn't go over every single issue that these cars can have, or these engines can have, but I did go over the most common ones, especially the ones that I see the most. I get a lot of these cars in. Now these cars are reaching that point where they're aging a little bit, and a lot more people are able to buy them secondhand. You're gonna start seeing a lot more of these issues. So I thought it would be a good idea to show people what they're getting into, especially if you're trying to buy one of these cars with these engines. Now you have an idea. If you have any questions, feel free to leave a comment down below. Anybody that's viewing, a lot of people know about these cars as well. They can feel free to chime in and help out. But anyways, thanks for watching. Make sure you go check out the videos I've linked down below, and stay tuned for more videos.